Hey Ottawa, this is Annalee Rice with Royal LePage Performance Realty in Ottawa, Ontario. And this is your Monday market snapshot for Monday, April 10th, 2023. A couple of points for context as we go through the stats today. First off, mid last week in Ottawa and Eastern Ontario, we saw an ice storm. It was a pretty significant event that affected a lot of people. And the second thing with Easter weekend, long weekend, a lot of people traveling and hosting family and stuff. So these things definitely play some parts into the stats that we see this week. Just as a heads up, I've included a couple of new slides to delve into some specific details. First off, I'm going to talk about averages and how to look at the stats and the averages for detached homes. And then also the second thing is the months of inventory that we're seeing. Give a little bit more insight onto that. As I said, I'm Annalee Rice with Royal LePage Performance, and I hope that you find these updates helpful. Please let me know in the comments whether or not there's anything that you'd like to see on these weekly updates. Okay, so let's look at the stats. Citywide, the number of active listings at the end of the week dropped. This was the second week in a row where we've seen a drop after the peak from after March break earlier last month. We'll discuss new listings momentarily, but with regards to sales, the number of sales this week actually stayed pretty steady. It was at 250 this week. And the breakdown of sales this week seems that more detached homes sold and fewer townhomes and condominiums. This graph illustrates the drop in the active listings, that's represented by the green, and then the steady numbers for the conditional sold and sold properties this week. They were exactly the same as last week. I expect things to pick up next week for new listings as well as sales. Let's see if I'm right. Okay, for new listings, there were only 302 properties listed this week over the last week, and of that, 79% or 239 were new to the market. And that 21% of the properties that were listed this week were relists. That was 63 properties. The new listings to the market were down 21% this week compared to last, and as you can see, the week before it was higher even still. So the last spike that we saw, up over 400, was just following the March break. And so I expect that we're going to see a correspondingly jump this coming week as people list following the holidays. Okay, so of the sales this week, 26% of the properties that sold this week sold without any conditions. So the ratios are staying fairly steady over the last few weeks. We're seeing 26% without conditions and the rest with conditions, and that's good for buyers and sellers. Of the properties that did sell this week, 24% were selling within 7 or fewer days, and that's the same as last week. And 66% of the homes sold this week had been on the market for 30 days or less. Again, that's pretty much the same as it's been the last couple weeks. Okay, let's zoom into the different areas of the city to see their specific stats. When we get to the central urban region, we see that the numbers match fairly well with what we saw citywide. Detached home sales were up, causing the number of active listings for detached homes to drop. Condo sales this week were back down to what they were prior to last week's bump. For Canada and Stittsville, we're seeing a slight increase in the number of detached homes listed for sale. This is a little bit counter to what we're seeing across the rest of the city. And the number of sales, however, matches what we're seeing across the city. In Barrhaven and Riverside South, we see that the numbers are in line with what we see in the rest of the city for active listings. Sales, however, are a bit contrary to what the city averages were this week. Home sales for detached properties were down not only this week, but they're down overall. And sales of townhomes returned to a more normal level from last week's exceptionally high number of sales. And in Orleans, we see a fairly significant drop in the number of active listings for detached homes. The number of sales for detached homes has remained quite high, up around 20 for the last 3 weeks. And so that's really dropping the number of active listings, and they're just not keeping up. The number of townhome sales jumped significantly. It was up 12 to 17. Frankly, that's not sustainable. With 17 sales and only 36 active properties listed, something has to change. I dug in a little bit on that. The list to sale price ratio for Orleans townhomes was at 99%. That means they're selling almost at asking price. And in fact, 35% of the properties, the townhomes that sold this week, sold for above asking price. In comparison, for Canada, it was only 16% this week. So here are the detailed stats for the residential detached homes across Ottawa. And we also have the townhome detailed data for across the city and in the various areas. The days on market for townhome sales in the suburbs continues to be quite low. We see the average breaking below the 20-day mark for Barrhaven and Riverside South this week. And finally, we've got the numbers for the condominiums across the city. We see that Barrhaven and Riverside South have only an average of 15 days on market for property sold. However, that was only 2 sales, so it's pretty specific to those properties. Okay, so here's a little bit of new information. Let's talk about averages. Every week, I share the average price for listed properties and sold properties. And I also share the average cumulative days on market for those properties that are currently listed, as well as those that have sold. And I don't know about everybody else, but I seem to think that there's a huge gap between the averages that are listed and the averages that are sold. So let's get into a little bit of why the averages that we see for the listed properties are so high. So this graph shows you the number of properties listed in different price brackets. That's the light blue bars, the number of properties listed in each price bracket, all the way up from 500,000 up to 3 million plus. And the light gray line just around the 1 million, 1.2 million represents the average list price according to the data. So what we see, the average list price across the city was 1.164 million. But 2/3 of the properties that are listed in the city are listed below that price right now. The second thing that this graph shows us is that the average cumulative days on market, the city average is 68. That's the red line that cuts across the whole graph. And yet we see that for the bulk of the properties, their average cumulative days on market is below that. And it's the properties that are high priced that have really high days on market, and that is skewing the averages up. So for the, I'm going to say, average person, they're probably listing or buying a property that's under that 1 million mark, maybe up to 1.2. That's where the bars are highest. But then they're also, those homes are selling quicker than the average. And so they're more around the 50 to 60 days this week. Or yeah, these were all stats for this week. This next graph discusses the months of inventory. So generally, I've been sharing information about the number of active listings, the number of new listings, and then also the number of sales. And what media and realtors like to talk is about how many months of inventory we have. And that definition is if no more properties listed, then how many months would it take to sell all of the properties that are currently listed? So these graphs, I've separated out into detached, townhomes, and condominiums, show us the current, and that's what the numbers are there. So the current months of inventory at the rate of sales that we're seeing were less than 2.5, and in case of townhomes, 1.25 months of inventory. So although we see more properties being listed, the sales are picking up at a higher percentage rate, and we're actually seeing it's becoming more difficult to buy a property. We can see that they peaked out for detached homes just shy of 4 months of inventory, and that was in around late fall, October-ish, September, October. And then for townhomes, it barely even cracked, didn't even get up to 3 months of inventory. And for condominiums, we got up at around 3.5, a little over 3.5 at the beginning of this year. So up till like January, it was around 3.5. But for all 3 types of homes, our months of inventory is dropping. So unless we get a significant increase in the number of active listings and the sales will pick up accordingly, then we're getting back into the territory of where we're seeing multiple offers and prices being elevating again. And nobody wants to see that. And just for a bit of reference, the general consensus is that a balanced market is considered when you have 4 to 6 months of inventory. Anything below that 4 months inventory is considered a seller's market. It might not seem that way right now here in Ottawa because the sales are slow and we've got lots of conditional sales and such that, but things are shifting a little bit where there's more competition for properties. Okay, so that was lots of information today, and I'm sorry for a bit of a long video, but I hope that you find these updates helpful. And if you do, please follow along on my YouTube channel, Your Ottawa Realtor, or check out my Facebook, Instagram, follow along on social media. I'd love to hear from you if you have suggestions of what information you'd like to hear. Have a great week.